Our RV broke down in a blizzard. The cold was killing us, but they made it worse. This laptop feels like it's made of lead and my hands are still figuring themselves out. Whether or not that's from the cold still remains to be seen. Regardless, I have to write this down before the memories blur. Before I start doubting myself. We never should have taken that trip. It started with Lucas's big announcement. He barged into my apartment, holding up a set of keys like he'd just won the lottery. "Guess what?" he said, grinning ear to ear. "I swear, if this is about another one of your lame late-night escapades," Emily called from the kitchen, not even bothering looking towards him. "Relax," Lucas said, plopping down on the couch next to Anya. "This isn't stupid, it's genius. I got us an RV." Anya raised an eyebrow, her laptop screen reflecting the skeptical twist of her lips. "You got an RV? Like, you own it now?" Lucas shook his head. No, I borrowed it. My cousin owed me a favor. Thing runs great." "Define great," I said, finally acknowledging him. "Engine purrs like a kitten," Lucas said. "Heater works, stove's good, beds are functional, and best of all, it's free. No hotels, no tents, just us, the open road, and—" "The smell of tetanus," Emily interrupted, walking over with her mug. "It does not smell like tetanus," Lucas shot back, mock offended. "Does it have tires?" Anya asked us, not bothering to hide her smirk anymore. Lucas ignored her. "I'm serious, guys. This is perfect. We've been talking about a trip forever, right? Well, here it is. Northern Wisconsin, beautiful snow-covered campground, a proper camping trip." "Camping trip?" I asked, setting my pen down. "You're aware it's December, right? In Wisconsin, with a major cold front coming in? People die doing this kind of stuff." Lucas waved me off. "Oh, come on. It's not like we're climbing Everest. We'll park the RV, take some pictures, roast marshmallows. You'll thank me when you're Instagram famous." "Mark doesn't even have Instagram," Anya said. "Exactly my point," Lucas replied. Emily sipped her coffee, eyeing him over the rim of her mug. "What happens if this great RV breaks down in the middle of nowhere?" Lucas leaned back, crossing his arms. "Then I fix it. Easy." "Oh yeah," Anya said, closing her laptop. "Because you're such an expert mechanic." "I know enough," Lucas said defensively. Emily looked at me. "What do you think, Mark?" I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say no, but the way Lucas looked at me, hopeful, almost pleading, made it hard. Plus, I couldn't deny the idea of getting away for a while sounded nice. I sighed. "Fine, but if this RV dies, you're walking back to town, not me." Lucas grinned. "Deal?" The trip started out fine. Better than fine, actually. The road stretched out ahead of us, snow falling gently, dusting the trees and the narrow two-lane highway. The RV rattled every now and then, but Lucas seemed confident behind the wheel. Anya's dog Max sprawled out on the middle of the floor, snoring softly as Anya snapped photos from the passenger seat. Emily was in the back, organizing our supplies. "Who packed this much junk food?" she hollered out. "It's called being prepared," I shouted back. Lucas glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Junk food? What happened to your health is wealth mantra?" "It's emergency junk food," I shot back. Anya laughed. "You're the kind of guy who brings Monopoly to a frat party, aren't you?" "He is." "Fun fact, Monopoly ruins friendships," Lucas said, tapping on the steering wheel for emphasis. "Only if you play wrong," I said. The teasing went on for a while, the kind of banter that comes out naturally when you're with people you care about. But a few hours into the trip, the first signs of trouble presented itself. It came from a sound, a low sputtering beneath the hum of the engine. Chug 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 thunk. What was that?" Emily asked, poking her head into the cabin. Lucas frowned, tapping the dashboard. "Probably just the cold." "Let me," clunk. The RV shuddered and lurched to a stop. Lucas swore under his breath and turned the key again. Click, click, click. Nothing. "Lucas," Anya said slowly, "please tell me you can fix this." He sighed, already pulling on his jacket. "It's probably something minor. I'll check." He stepped outside, the door slamming shut behind him with a loud thud. A wisp of cold air from the outside dropped the temperature almost immediately. Anya zipped up her coat while Emily started digging out blankets. "Great," I muttered. "Now what?" A glance out of the window only showed a slowly dissolving road with an endless mask of trees on either side. "I guess we'll wait," Emily said. "Lucas'll figure it out." Max whined, his ears perked. The wind outside the RV continued to pick up, howling through the trees and whistling against the metal cabin. Lucas came back inside after a crisp 10 minutes, his boots dragging snow onto the linoleum floor. His face was flushed from the cold, but there was an uncharacteristic tightness in his jaw. "Well?" Emily asked, her voice edged with tension. "It's the fuel line," Lucas said, shaking snow off his jacket. "It's frozen solid. I don't have the tools to fix it out here." Anya rubbed her hands together, blowing on them for warmth. "So what does that mean? We're stuck?" "For now," Lucas admitted, glancing at me. "I'll call for help in the morning once there's better light." "Wait, why not call now?" I asked. Lucas held up his phone, the screen showing a single, mocking bar of service. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere. I'll have to hoof it until I get reception." Emily groaned and slumped into the corner seat. "Great, this is how every horror movie starts." "Relax," Lucas said, forcing a grin. "It's not that bad. We've got food, blankets, and each other. Worst case scenario, we'll hike to a ranger station tomorrow." "Because hiking through a snowstorm is so much better," Emily muttered, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "It's not storming yet," Anya said, peering out the window. "It's just snowing lightly. Honestly, it's kind of pretty." The rest of us followed her gaze. She wasn't wrong. The snow drifted down in soft, delicate flakes, coating the surrounding trees in white. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, empty and peaceful. For a moment, it was almost comforting. Then Max started growling. The sound was low and guttural, his ears pinned back as he stared at the door. "Hey," I said softly, reaching to scratch behind his ears. "What's up, boy?" He didn't respond, just kept growling, his body tense like he was ready to lunge. "Maybe he heard an animal?" Anya suggested. Emily frowned. "An animal? Out here in the middle of winter? What would be dumb enough to wander around in this cold?" Lucas stood and walked to the door, cracking it open just enough to stick his head outside. The sudden rush of cold made the rest of us shiver. "Do you see anything?" I asked. "Nope," he said, shutting the door quickly. "Just snow and trees." Max didn't stop growling. A couple of hours later, we started settling in for the night. Lucas and Emily rigged up a system of blankets and jackets to keep us warm, while Anya tried to coax Max into relaxing. "I don't get it," she said, scratching his back. "He's usually so calm on trips." "Maybe he's just picking up on our nerves," I said. "Why is it so cold in here?" Emily said, settling into a corner with her arms crossed. "The weather didn't mention anything about it dropping below freezing." Lucas chuckled dryly. "Hey, it's not like we're totally helpless. We've got camping supplies. If it keeps getting colder, we can light a fire outside." "And risk freezing to death faster?" Emily shot back. "What do you want me to say? It's better than sitting in here and complaining." "Can you two not?" I said, cutting in before things got heated. "Let's just focus on staying warm and figure the rest out in the morning." The tension broke slightly, but there was still an edge in the air. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind billow against the RV. I took in a deep breath. I needed to get outside for a moment to unwind before trying to sleep. When I opened up the rear doors, I saw them. Footprints. The snow outside was untouched except for a line of small, bare, childlike prints leading from the trees to the RV's front door. Guys?" I said, my voice soft. Anya looked up first, her eyes squinting as she followed my gaze. "What are those?" Lucas walked over and glanced down. "Footprints. They're small," I said. Emily joined us, choosing to peer out of the frosted window. "A kid? Out here? That doesn't make any sense." We stared for a moment. The strange, meandering path of prints seemed completely unworried. They had stopped just short of the door. We didn't say anything, but we all noticed that none of the prints were leading away. Max growled again from behind us, low and insistent, his nose pointed towards the open door. Lucas shook his head. "Maybe it's from an animal that just sort of looks like footprints. Snow can mess with shapes." "Yeah," Anya chirped in, unconvincingly. No one wanted to admit what we were really thinking. Deep in the tree line, I thought I heard something. A faint floating sound. A laugh, high and breathy, like a breeze being swept through the trees. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide. Lucas nodded slowly. "Yeah." By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the trees, none of us had slept. Not properly, anyway. Emily had dozed off for a few minutes, her head slumped against the wall, but every creak of the RV made her snap to attention. Anya had stayed curled up with Max, one hand clutching his fur, the other pressed to her mouth, searching for those hot little bursts of breath. Lucas sat yawning in the front seat, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. I didn't fare much better. I just stared out the window, watching as the snow piled higher and higher around us. The frost from the outside started to creep across the metal of the RV walls. "All right," Lucas said eventually, clapping his hands together to break the stillness. "Here's the plan. Mark and I head out, try to find the main road or a ranger station. Worst case, we flag someone down." Emily sat up sharply. "Are you serious? It's got to be in the double digits, and not on the positive side." "What's the alternative?" Lucas sighed. "We just sit here and wait to freeze to death." Emily gestured at the iced-over windows. "You think hiking through that is a better idea?" "We have to do something," Lucas snapped, running a hand through his hair. "The RV's dead, the heater's barely hanging on, and we can't just—" "Stop," Anya's voice cut through the argument. She looked pale, her eyes darting between us. "Can we please not fight right now? We're all scared. Let's think this through," Lucas exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Fine. Ideas." I hesitated. "What about a fire? We've got wood, matches. If we can melt some of this ice, maybe we can make the heater last longer." "That's not terrible," Lucas admitted. Emily crossed her arms. "It's better than splitting up and blindly wandering out into the storm." "Okay," Lucas said. "Fire it is." The fire should have helped. In theory, it should have been simple: clear a spot in the snow, stack some wood, and let the flames do the rest. But the moment we stepped outside, the cold wrapped around us like a living thing. The wind needled its way through every layer we wore like they weren't even there. "God," Emily muttered, clutching her coat. "It's even colder than last night." When we hopped off of the back of the RV, our feet slid straight to the ground. The snow underfoot gave away too easily, falling away from our boots without compacting. It was like stepping into powdered ash. We didn't think too much about it, though. Lucas and I were too focused on clearing a patch for the fire. It was easier than it should have been, like moving around fake snow from a TV set. It wasn't long before we had the wood and kindling set up. Lucas brought the flame from the lighter down towards the pit. The flame flickered and died before it got anywhere near the kindling. Lucas swore under his breath. He tried again. Same thing. The cold was getting worse. "Here, try this one," Anya said, handing him another lighter. Click. The flame barely lasted a second before a gust of wind swallowed it. "Come on," he muttered, fumbling with the switch. "Maybe we should just go back inside," Anya said, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I was about to agree when I heard the faint, tinny sound of an old music box. The melody was distant at first, almost delicate, as though it didn't want to interrupt us. It gently crept into the clearing between the trees, carried on the wind, growing louder with each note. Cheerful and steady, yet unmistakably offbeat, like a nursery rhyme slowed to a crawl. We followed the noise towards an open strip of barren snow that used to be called a road. Then, through the tree line, we watched as a figure slid out into the open. It wasn't sudden. There was no jolt of shock, no moment of panic. It arrived as though it had every right to be there. And for a brief moment, we thought it might be someone who could help us. The figure wore a long, black tailored coat, with a wide-brimmed hat that was tilted at an almost careless angle. But the face that was hidden beneath it was something that I wish I could forget. It was smooth, pale, and polished. Not a single wrinkle on its head. Its features were just slightly off enough that it felt too close to being human, just close enough to be wrong. The eyes were large and completely black, like carved pieces of polished coal. There was a faint, reflective shine to them that glimmered from the snow. Its nose was delicately thin, sharp, and long, and the mouth thin and uncomfortably wide, curved upward in a slight performative smile. It stopped in the middle of the road, placing one hand over its chest. Then, with a singular fluid motion, it bent over at the waist into a deep bow, its hat almost brushing against the snow. None of us moved. We froze. We watched as the figure straightened, reaching into its coat with a calm, precise motion. It withdrew something small, something metal that caught the pale light of the clearing. A music box topped with a dancing ballerina. Its long, gloved fingers shifted over to the crank, turning it slowly, deliberately. The melody twisted and warped with each turn, the sound becoming clearer and sharper, as though it were summoning the air itself to attention. The ballerina began twirling. Emily broke from her trance. She took a half step backward, her boots crunching softly against the snow. The figure turned its head toward her, the motion unnervingly confident, the glint of its black eyes reflecting her movement. It raised its arms up in a flourish. Then the children appeared. They came one by one, stepping out from the tree line with an odd sort of playfulness, skipping and spinning as they emerged. Their bare feet left no marks in the snow. I counted 6, maybe 7 children. Their silhouettes were half obscured by the swirling snow. Jesus, Lucas breathed. The figure raised one arm, a sharp, controlled gesture that froze the children in place. They stood there, still as statues, before their faces finally turned toward us. Even through the snow, we could tell they were wrong. Their eyes were too small, their mouths too wide. Frost rimed their cheeks and hair, and their expressions never changed from anything other than excitement. The figure tilted its head, as if inviting us to react to their little show. Inside, I whispered, my voice dry. Emily didn't need to be told twice. She turned around and bolted toward the RV doors, pulling Anya with her. Lucas grabbed my arm, yanking me back as the figure took a single step forward, its footfall utterly silent. We slammed the door shut behind us, fumbling with the lock until our stiffening fingers prevailed. Emily had already begun yanking the blinds closed. Meanwhile, the sound of the music box hadn't stopped. What the hell was that? Emily stuttered out. Lucas didn't answer. He paced near the door, peeking through a crack in the blinds. They were kids, Anya said softly, her voice distant. Did everyone else see them? They weren't kids, I muttered. Max growled again from the lowest point in his throat, his hackles raised. The sound of his nails clicking back and forth in front of the door filled the cabin. We waited, quiet, hoping somehow it's to away. But then came the knock. It was a single, deliberate tap at the door. We all turned to face it. Another knock followed, calm and measured. Max barked sharply, throwing himself against the door. His claws scratched at the metal, but the sound barely seemed to register over the rising tension. Don't, I whispered as Lucas moved toward the blinds. He ignored me, pulling them back just enough to peek outside again. He froze, his face draining of color. He quickly took a step back. What is it? Emily asked, her voice shaking. He's closer, Lucas murmured. I forced myself to look. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, I saw him. The man stood just outside the RV, his face tilted upward like it was admiring a painting. Behind him, the children had gathered. They stood in a loose semicircle, their heads tilted in unison, their wide, frozen eyes staring directly at the RV. It looked like they were about to sing a carol. The man moved. Slowly, he reached out and adjusted the brim of his hat, then withdrew the music box again. His long fingers wound the crank with loving strokes. The melody shifted, the notes warping into a new tune, something higher, lighter. The children swayed gently. One of them giggled. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade, sharp and high-pitched. Another joined in, then another, their laughter blending with the music until it was impossible to tell where one sound ended and the other began. What do they want? Emily whispered, her back pressed against the far wall. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The figure tilted its head again, as if he had heard her question. Then, with a gentle motion, he raised a long finger and softly tapped against the frosted window, the sound crisp and deliberate. Anya whimpered, curling into herself. They're going to come inside, no, Lucas said firmly. They can't get in. The figure tapped the glass again, this time with more force. A spiderweb of frost began to spread outward from where his finger had pressed against the pane. Lucas, I said, my throat hoarse. Step back. He didn't move, his eyes locked on the frost as it crept across the window. The figure's black eyes seemed to regard the frosted glass with amusement. Then the music stopped, cutting off mid-note. The voice replaced it. Won't you come outside? It wasn't loud, but it felt like it came from everywhere. All at once. The voice was sharp, smooth, and layered, as though every word cracked into dozens of smaller voices. Emily flinched, pressing her hands over her ears. Lucas backed away from the door. We're not going anywhere, he yelled, his voice shaking. The figure dropped its head, almost as if it were in contemplation. Then, with a single movement, it turned the crank on the music box again. The melody resumed faster, harsher. The children began to move, their hands tapping softly against the RV, their eyes never leaving the windows. The frost on the glass began to spread inward, like creeping vines. They're coming in, Anya said, her voice flat. No, Lucas snapped, grabbing a knife from the counter. They're not getting in here. The door rattled violently, the metal groaning under the strain. Max barked again, louder this time, throwing himself against the base of the door, as though he could hold it closed. The music swelled, filling every corner of the RV. The encroaching ice raced across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, encasing everything in a thin, brittle layer. The door gave a final, shuddering rattle, and then it stopped. The music cut off again. We stood frozen. The silence was almost unbearable. The frost-covered walls creaked softly, but nothing moved. Nothing spoke. "They're gone," Lucas said, after a long moment. Anya shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "They're still out there." The air inside grew colder with each passing second, crawling into our skin, our lungs, our bones. The frost wasn't just on the walls anymore, it was covering us. A thin layer of ice clung to Lucas's jacket, to Emily's hair, and even to Max's fur. It spread with a controlled sluggishness. I noticed my fingers first. They tingled, then turned numb. I flexed them, trying to shake it off, but the stiffness didn't go away. My gloves felt like they weren't there anymore. As if the cold had seeped straight through the fabric, right into the flesh. "We need to move," Lucas muttered, his voice trembling. He tried to walk, but his knees buckled, and he slumped onto the kitchen seat. Lucas, Emily's voice cracked. Are you okay?" She took a step towards him. Her lips were cracked and purple. Her cheeks had already lost all their color. Lucas didn't reply. He just stared at his hands. His gloves were frozen stiff, the fabric cracking as he tried to flex his fingers. He peeled one off, and I gagged. His fingertips were white, almost translucent, with deep, angry cracks that bled sluggishly. The skin along his knuckles had split open, exposing raw, purple flesh beneath. "I can't feel them," he said, his voice distant. I can't feel anything," Emily whimpered, pulling her own hands close to her chest. I tried to speak, but my lips wouldn't move right. My tongue felt thick and uncoordinated, like it was stuck to the roof of my mouth. I reached up, brushing at my face, and froze. My cheek was hard to the touch, the skin taut and unyielding. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, barely fogging the air, and when I exhaled, I saw tiny flecks of ice falling from my lips. Anya's voice was faint, barely audible. She was still sitting by the window, her arms wrapped around Max, who was lying unnaturally still. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy, and her breath came in weak, uneven gasps. She looked down at Max, her hands trembling. His fur was matted with frost, his nose coated in a thin layer of ice. His chest didn't rise. "Max," Anya whispered, shaking him gently. "Max, come on. Wake up." He didn't move. Her trembling turned violent, and she let out a strangled cry, pressing her face into his frozen fur. No. The sound snapped something in me. I stumbled toward her, my legs barely cooperating, every step sending sharp jolts of pain up my frozen feet. I knelt beside her, reaching out, but she flinched away, clutching Max tighter. "We're freezing," Emily said suddenly, her voice sharp and slurred. Her teeth chattered violently, her body shaking. We're freezing to death," No, Lucas muttered, his voice thick. His eyes sluggishly flitted around the RV. "No, we're not. We can't be. We're inside. The heat's on, we're dying," Emily murmured, under her broken breath. Her words hung in the air, sharp and jagged. I staggered back to my feet, grabbing the edge of the counter for support. My head was spinning, my vision blurred at the edges, and my heart felt like it was slowing. Then, I saw it. The frost on the window had cleared, just enough to reveal a single black eye staring in. My breath caught in my throat. The man's face was pressed against the glass, its lips pulled into that faint, thin smile. It blinked once, slowly, almost lazily. Emily sobbed, fully collapsing onto the floor. "Why is it watching us? Why is it just watching?" Lucas began to laugh, a low, strained sound that turned into a cough. He wheezed, his breath rattling. Is it getting warmer in here?" The creature's black eyes shifted slightly, locking onto me. It raised one gloved hand and tapped gently on the glass. The sound was soft but punctual. My body convulsed involuntarily, my limbs jerking as I tried to move, to run, to do anything. But I couldn't look away from those eyes. Black. Endless. Swallowing everything they saw. I sank to the floor, my strength draining away. We were freezing. And it was waiting. Anya stirred first. Her movements were slow, almost hesitant. as though she were waking from a dream. She didn't say anything. She just stood up, staring down at Max's frozen body with a strange, distant look on her face. "Anya," I whispered. "What are you doing?" She didn't respond. Her trembling hands slid under Max's stiff body. With a strength I didn't think she had left, she lifted him into her arms. The frost cracked and splintered as his limbs shifted. "Anya, stop," Emily rasped, her voice faint and broken. "Where are you going?" But Anya didn't listen. She stood unsteadily, her legs shaking beneath her, and turned toward the door. "Anya!" No, Lucas reached out, but his body was weak. The effort made him cough violently. She didn't look back. Her pale, frostbitten hands fumbled with the lock. The metal screeched softly as it turned. The door creaked open, and the cold rushed in. "Anya, please." I tried to stand again, but my legs gave out beneath me, sending me sprawling onto the frozen floor. "Don't go out there," she hesitated in the doorway. The wind caught her hair, tossing it around her face like brittle threads. For a moment, she looked back at us. Her eyes were strange, glassy, almost peaceful. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll be warm soon then." She stepped outside. The door swung shut behind her. With a hollow clang, with all my strength, I pulled myself up to a window. Through the frost-covered glass, I watched as Anya carried Max into the clearing. Her movements were slow, mechanical. Her head bowed against the wind. The snow swirled around her, fluttering in strange, erratic patterns. The creature watched her approach, its black eyes glinting with faint amusement. The children walked towards her, swaying with every step, their smiles widening. Anya sank to her knees in the snow, cradling Max's body. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, fogging the air around her face. I watched as frost crept up her arms, her legs, her cheeks, but she didn't move. The creature stepped forward. Its coat billowed slightly in the wind. It crouched low, its movements precise and deliberate, and extended a hand toward Anya. Her breathing slowed. Her head tilted upward, her glassy eyes locking onto the creature's face. I don't know if she took its hand or if it just hovered there, but she smiled. Just for a moment, before her body slumped forward. Her arms went limp, and Max's frozen body fell into the snow beside her. I slumped down against the RV walls and closed my eyes. When I managed to open them again, I noticed how far the ice had advanced. It had crawled up the walls, pooled in the corners, and spread like veins across the floor. Emily was curled up on the floor, her head pulled to the side, her lips stained a deep, unnatural blue. Her breaths were faint, so faint they seemed to stop at times, before resuming with a shallow wheeze. But Lucas wasn't breathing at all. His body sat rigid in the seat, his head bowed forward as though in deep contemplation. His face was gaunt. The pale skin stretched tightly over his cheekbones, while his hands were frozen mid-clench, like sprawling claws. His eyes were wide and glossy, staring through a layer of frost. Emily's shallow breathing eventually fully slowed. Her chest rose and fell, with longer pauses in between. Her face was slack. Her eyelids fluttered, before sinking shut. Whatever part of her was still fighting to stay conscious was losing, couldn't look at her anymore. I could feel the same numbness creeping over me. A heaviness pulling me under. It wasn't sudden, it was maddeningly slow, creeping into my head, until the edges of my vision softened. My hands no longer felt like mine. I tried to lift them, to reach for something, anything, but they stayed limp at my sides. The world around me dimmed, retreating into a strange, hazy fog. The shapes in the RV grew indistinct. The door creaked. The sound sliced through the fog, jarring, unnatural. I forced my eyes to focus, but it felt like trying to see through a frozen lens. The door had opened. The man stepped inside. He moved with unhurried care. His boots were soundless against the slick floor. I couldn't turn my head to follow him, but I saw him out of the corner of my eye, tall and angular, the brim of his hat brushing against the low ceiling. His presence filled the room, like a heavy weight. He passed by me without a glance, his gaze fixed on Emily. He stopped beside her, leaning down slowly, his face close to hers. Those black, glinting eyes studied her slack expression, like they were looking beneath her skin. And then, the man turned toward me. He smiled. Just slightly, just enough. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything. But I was a spectator, trapped in my own body. My breath caught in my throat, frozen along with the rest of me. All I could do was meet its gaze. Then, the headlights hit. A sudden, blinding flash of light cut through the RV. My vision burned white, and for a moment, I thought I heard the creature's footsteps falter. When the spots cleared from my eyes, it was gone. The door swung open, the snow swirling violently outside. But there was no trace of the figure, no sign it had ever been there. My mind finally slipped. I woke to the soft beeping of a heart monitor and the rhythmic hiss of an oxygen mask. The hospital room was sterile and bright. I noticed that my body felt heavy and strange, stiff, like it wasn't entirely mine. A nurse stood at my bedside, adjusting something on an IV stand. She turned when she noticed my eyes open, her expression softening with relief. "Welcome back," she said quietly, offering a faint smile. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. Water, she handed me a cup, and I drank. The liquid seared its way down my throat. It hurt, but at least it felt like something. "Where's Emily?" I asked, my voice rasping. Her expression shifted, her smile fading into something more careful. "She's next door," she said softly. "She's stable, but..." Not awake yet, I nodded, closing my eyes briefly. Emily was alive. That was enough. The hours blurred together, my body trapped in a haze of pain and exhaustion. When I finally had the strength to sit up, I asked to see Emily. The doctor hesitated, but eventually agreed, guiding me slowly down the hall. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, my steps dragging against the polished floor. When I reached her room, I stopped in the doorway. Emily looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her pale face almost blending into the stark white of the sheets. Her chest rose and fell faintly. The machines around her beeped steadily, indifferent to how fragile she looked. I hesitated, then shuffled forward and sat beside her. Her skin had the same off-color pallor as mine, like the frost had left a stain. I watched her breathe, each rise and fall of her chest, a small reassurance that she was still here, still alive. After a while, her eyes fluttered open. She squinted against the light, then turned her head to me. Her lips parted in a faint smile. "You're awake," I said, my voice hoarse. The relief that flooded through me was almost enough to push the other feelings away. "Yeah," she murmured, her voice rough and weak. "What happened? I don't know," I said. "But we're alive," she nodded slowly, but there was no relief in her expression. Her gaze drifted past me, out of focus, like she was looking through the walls. "For now," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. I turned my attention to the window, watching the snow swirl against the glass. Then the TV sputtered on. The sound cut through the silence, a sudden, violent hiss of static. I flinched, turning toward the corner of the room where the screen glowed faintly. No one had touched the remote. "Did you turn it on?" I asked Emily. My voice sounded far away. She shook her head weakly. The screen flickered again. The static, thick and noisy. Lines of distortion rippled through the image. For a moment, nothing happened. It was just chaos on the screen, noise clawing at our ears. Then, the static shifted, and the picture began to clear. Shapes emerged, faint, shadowy figures moving within the gray haze. A slow, warped melody played faintly in the background, growing louder as the picture sharpened. The tune was familiar, a song from a 70s TV special. "If you try to turn around, when you hear his icy sound, no," Emily whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but I saw the fear in her wide, glassy eyes. The song continued, each word sharper, more distorted, crawling out of the speakers. "He's sure to disappear. But you know," "Yes, you know." The screen glitched violently. The shapes twisted, contorted. For a moment I thought I saw something, a figure standing still in the static, its dark form motionless, its wide-brimmed hat unmistakable. "Then you know Jack Frost is here." The screen went black. "Turn it off," Emily rasped. "It's already off," I said. Emily stared at the blank screen, her breaths shallow and uneven. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "It's not gone," she said, her voice rattling. "It's never going to leave." I didn't answer. My eyes were still locked on the TV, waiting for the static to return. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought I could hear the faint, tinny sound of a music box.